Now, I think that it's kind of funny that Excel looks through your original data set and examines those values to figure out whether the column is a date column, a value column, or a text column. And it's kind of funny to me that if I have 10,000 rows with values and one row that contains a blank, that completely trips Excel up and they think that I have a text column instead of a value column. The reason that this is frustrating is if you look at our current pivot table, the output from Microsoft is leaving us many, many blanks. For example, cell B8 right now contains a blank, and that's Excel's way of saying that we didn't sell any of A354 on January 2nd. Well, that's fine, but if we didn't sell any, I would really rather see a 0 there. This was a problem back in the original pivot table over 15 years ago, and luckily, they've given us a way to correct the problem. We need to go to the Pivot Table Tools Options tab. In the Pivot Table group on the left-hand side, there is an Options dropdown. From that dropdown, choose Options. The Pivot Table Options dialog box is now 4 different tabs, but the tab that we need is here on the Layout and Format tab. It's the setting for Empty Cells Show. Now, this is already checked in the default to show a blank. If you'd like to show a 0, click inside that text box and type a 0. Click OK, and now Excel fills all of those blanks with 0. This is a great improvement. I get a question sometimes in my power seminars where people say, hey, is there a way that we could fill that with something else? A couple of dashes or something like that. Yes, you can put whatever you'd like in that field, and Excel will use that anytime that there is no value for that period. Personally, though, I like the zeros. Another minor frustration is that we're obviously working with a pivot table. I mean, on this sheet 1, the only thing that's here is a pivot table. One of Microsoft's rules for the ribbon is that if you're not working with the pivot table, it'll put away the pivot table tabs on the ribbon. Watch what happens when I click outside of the table. Those 2 ribbon tabs have completely disappeared. Now, there's really strange logic that if I accidentally click out and then immediately click back in, Excel will redisplay the tabs and take me back to the Options tab where I was. However, if you would happen to accidentally click out and click another cell and then click back in, Excel redisplays the tabs, but you're left on the Home ribbon instead of the Options ribbon where you last left off. I understand Microsoft's logic in this. They're trying to make sure that no one has a picture toolbar left up on their screen for 6 months after they're no longer using pictures. However, in this particular case, since there's nothing else on the sheet other than the pivot table, I really think that their desire to hide those options when I accidentally click out is really annoying. You just have to remember that if the pivot table field list and the ribbon tabs disappear, you need to click back into your pivot table. Now let's rearrange our pivot table some more. Let's take the product field off and take the date field off. Put the customer field along the left-hand side. To do that, we just have to click the customer field and drag the region field to go across the column labels. You'll notice that Excel still remembers that we have our top 10 auto filter turned on the customer field. You can see the little funnel next to customer in the top of the pivot table field list. Let's turn that filter off so we can see all of our customers. I'll open the drop-down next to the customer field and choose Clear Filter from Customer. I now see all of the customers in our data set. The great thing about pivot tables is it allows you to take a sea of data and create a very focused information report. I find that as soon as I'm able to produce this report, people start to see anomalies. They start to say, well, wait a second. We don't believe that Cool Jewelry Supply bought anything from the North region. Those records must be wrong. A great feature that we have in pivot tables is that if you question any number in the pivot table, you can very easily drill down to see the records behind that number. All you need to do is double-click the number. So someone's questioning the $30,695 in cell C9 for Cool Jewelry Supply in the North, I'll double-click that field. You'll notice that Excel has given me a brand new sheet. My data was originally on the pivot table sheet. My pivot table is on sheet 1. I now have a brand new sheet called sheet 2 that shows me the records that make up that number. This drill down capability works for any number in the pivot table. If I wanted to see all the records for a particular customer, I could click the total in column E. I now have a new sheet called sheet 3 that shows me all the records that make up that total. Now, if you discover something that's wrong, you don't want to fix it in sheet 2 or sheet 3. You want to go back to your original data set, the pivot table sheet, and fix the records there. One very important thing that you need to understand about pivot tables. Usually in Excel, if we change any cell, all of the formulas and all of the calculations instantly update. But the reason that pivot tables are so fast is that in our first step of creating a pivot table, Microsoft actually takes all the data on our worksheet and loads it into a special area in memory called a pivot cache. When you change data on the worksheet, it's not changing data in the pivot cache. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to randomly select a cell here and add $1 million to the cell. I can hear all the auditors out there just cringing. Relax. If I go to sheet 1, even though I've changed the original underlying data, my pivot table has not recalculated. Let me scroll down so we can see the total. We're still at 13.2 million. In order to refresh this data, I have to go to the Options tab and then click the large refresh button. If you were using pivot tables in the old version of Excel, the refresh button was a red exclamation point, which made no sense at all. I really appreciate that they've made it look like the refresh button in Internet Explorer. Kind of helps me understand that I need to refresh this table. When I click refresh, Excel goes back to the pivot table worksheet, reloads all of that data in the cache, and regenerates the pivot table. There, the 13.2 million just changed to 14.2 million. We now have the latest and greatest data. Hey, now I realize this is completely fictitious data, but I have to tell you, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight unless I go back and fix that number that I changed. I'm going to click on the pivot table tab. Cell F1100, I changed from 18,007 to 1 million. I'll change that number, go back to my sheet 1, and hit the refresh button on the Options tab in order to get back to the original data set. Thanks for humoring me there. I just feel better. I'm always worried that someone has gone into a spreadsheet and changed the number. It's one of those nightmares that we always have, so I just wanted to take care of fixing that. Okay, now we have a report here by customer, and you see that when we add a customer to the report, Excel shows us the customers alphabetically. But how do we really want to see it? Think about all the reports that you produce. The VP of Sales really doesn't care about seeing things alphabetically. They want to see the largest customers at the top. On the Pivot Table Options ribbon, there is the A to Z and Z to A sort buttons, and you could, if you wanted to, click the Z to A button to sort the customers into descending revenue. However, that is a one-time fix. As we change this report later, if we take region off and add product back on, Excel won't know that we always want customers sorted high to low. The better option is to go back to our drop-down in the top half of the Pivot Table field list and choose Sort Options there. If I choose More Sort Options, I can now say that I want to sort the customer field, descending Z to A, based on the sum of revenue field. If we had multiple numeric fields in the report, we could sort it based on sum of profit, sum of cost of goods sold, sum of quantity. In this case, the only one that makes sense is sum of revenue. Choose that and click OK. My data will now be sorted high to low by revenue, and as I add new fields in, Excel will continue to sort the customers high to low by revenue. For example, let me add the product field before the customers and scroll to the top. You'll see that we have the first product, A354. Within that product, the customers are sorted high to low, showing the largest customer purchase product, A354, down to the smallest. When we get to the next product in row 21, B713, the top customer, the customer with the highest revenue of that product, appears first. It's always better to go in and choose the More Sort options and specify to Excel that this customer should always be sorted in that particular sequence. And then no matter how you change the pivot table, Excel will continue to sort in that sequence. Well, pivot tables are very, very powerful. Let's face it, we were able to take 1,200 rows of data and create all these different summaries just by dragging fields around the pivot table field list. However, the thing that you'll notice about the pivot table is that it's very Spartan. It's just black and white with these simple borders. In Excel 2003, you might have tried using the Auto Format button on the pivot table toolbar. And you very quickly learned that the auto format in Excel 2003 was horrible because it would actually rearrange your table. Microsoft heard our pain and said that they were going to give us actually functional formats for pivot tables. Let's go take a look at the Design tab of the ribbon. On the right-hand side, we have the Pivot Table Styles Gallery. Now, a gallery is a new control in the Excel 2000 ribbon. Right now, we see 7 different styles. There are 3 control buttons along the right-hand side of the gallery. If we choose the second button, we'll see the next 7 styles. Or use the bottom button to open the entire gallery and see all the styles available to us. Excel provides styles that are light, medium, and dark. There's over 50 different styles available. Now, these styles are tied to the current document theme, and I'll show you in a minute how to change your theme if you don't like any of the colors that are here. However, let me choose one of the styles from the gallery. Wow, that's bright. Old habits die hard. I didn't have to select anything from the gallery. Let me show you how live preview works. I'll open the gallery again, and before I commit to anything, I can just hover, 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 hover. And when I find one that isn't quite as bright, I can choose that. The other cool thing is that we can modify those pivot table styles. You'll notice that to the left of the gallery, in the pivot table style options, there are 4 checkboxes. If I turn on banded rows, you'll see that Excel added very thin lines between each of the rows. Now, if you were looking for a style that supported banded rows, you should have selected that item first and then gone to your gallery. The gallery will change to give you an idea of which styles actually select banded rows. I needed to select the one just above the one I previously selected. Hover over that, and you'll see that we actually have the banded rows effect. Click that one to select it. In a similar fashion, you can turn on banded columns or the accent color for the row headers or the column headers. Again, you want to choose these checkboxes before going to the gallery in order to see how the style will actually look. Now, it's great that Excel gives us 50 plus different styles and allows us to modify them with banded rows, banded columns, column headers, and row headers. But some people say, I don't like the colors that are in the pivot table styles. We have a brand new concept in Excel 2007 called document themes. Now, if you've ever used PowerPoint, you know that you can change the slide theme. And when you change the slide theme, you may not have noticed that you get different effects, different fonts, and different colors. While PowerPoint 2007 ships with 20 themes, Word 2007 and Excel 2007 ship with the same 20 themes. If we go to the Page Layout ribbon, there's a drop-down showing the other 19 built-in themes. You can choose a different color, hover, 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 until you find a color scheme that you like. It's also possible to change the colors or the effects without changing the entire theme using the Colors drop-down. This takes those 50 styles times 20 different color schemes, gives you over 1,000 different color variations that you can use for formatting your pivot table. Now, I have to warn you that when you change the document theme, it doesn't just change this pivot table, it changes many elements in the workbook. It'll change all of your charts, any of your smart art, and any cells that have been formatted with a particular cell style will change based on the colors in the theme. Now I'm going to go back to the Office theme. Now it's still possible, even with all the different options in the Styles gallery and the 20 different themes, that none of those really do what you need. Excel gives you the opportunity to create your own pivot table themes. Let's say that we wanted to take this current theme and change the stripe size from 1 row to 2 rows. Well, we'd go back to the Design ribbon and open the gallery. Find the theme that we're currently using. You'll notice that it's highlighted. I'm going to right-click that theme and choose Duplicate. Excel gives me a new theme, and of course it uses kind of a strange name, basically appending a 2 to the old name. So I'm going to give this a name such as My Style 2 Rows. In the left list box are all of the items that we can customize in this theme. As you scroll through, there's almost 24 items that can be customized. In this case, we want to change the first row stripe and the second row stripe. I'll choose first row stripe and change the stripe size to 2, the second row stripe and change the stripe size to 2. Now when I click OK, you would expect that the pivot table will instantly update to reflect this new style, but that doesn't happen. We're actually creating a brand new style, and we have to go back to our gallery and choose the new style. I click OK. No change to the pivot table. That's expected. We'll go back, open the gallery, and scroll all the way to the top. Any of our custom styles show up at the top. Choose my style. I now have a style where each alternate color is 2 rows high. This new style we created is available on this computer, and it's available for all of our workbooks. If you want to share this theme with others, it's located in the App Data folder under Microsoft, under Themes. Simply copy that file from your computer to other people's computers, and you can basically create a company-wide theme for people to use in their pivot tables. If this is the theme that you like and you want all future pivot tables to use this particular theme, go back to your pivot table styles gallery, right-click the style, and choose Set as Default. All future pivot tables that you create will then have this style. So I'll hit Escape to close that.